going to be persecuted or attacked or something. And I'm like, no, we can be adults here.
Robyn Brown isn't sick. She's just mastered the art of strategic helplessness. If lethargy were an Olympic sport, Robyn Brown would be the undisputed gold medalist. One would be forgiven for wondering if she's grappling with a chronic illness. Her sluggish gait, perpetual mouth breathing, and inability to lift so much as a pencil certainly suggest as much. But rather than clarity or concern, Robyn offers vague allusions to cleaning her pantry, while visibly doing no such thing, and dramatically clutching at her cardigan like a Jane Austen heroine undone by the effort of existing. For someone allegedly in her mid-40s, she moves with the verve of a centenarian, though less spry grandparent and more Victorian ghost haunting the sofa. Speculation about possible health issues abounds. Hypothyroidism? Depression? Chronic pain? A cocktail of benzos and boxed wine? Her infamous Christmas meltdown, a dramatic confessional tantrum over her ruined holiday fantasy, reeked of more than just emotional instability. It was textbook substance-induced dramatics, complete with the telltale cocktail of self-pity and rage. Add to that the no drinking around the kids clause in her divorce and her well-documented aversion to mornings, and the pieces start fitting themselves together. But perhaps the most damning ailment Robyn suffers from is a terminal case of laziness, expertly disguised as fragility. Across 20 seasons, she has consistently outperformed everyone in one category: doing the least while demanding the most. Cooking? Not her job. Housework? Delegated. Child-rearing? Outsourced. Cody Brown, the ever-willing enabler, has long acted as her personal valet, taking on school prep and errands while she recedes into a floral print fog of cardigans and passive aggression. Her health may be questionable, but her strategic incompetence is not. Lest we forget the infamous therapy retreat where physical participation was required, Robyn suddenly didn't feel well, a convenient trend that's plagued her whenever accountability approaches. She didn't marry into polygamy. She married out of effort. Her honeymoon was the last time she exhibited a measurable pulse. And let's address the aesthetics. Robyn, once the dewy-eyed ingenue of the Sister Wives saga, now resembles the lost and found bin of a fundamentalist thrift store. The floral blouses, the matronly cardigans, the orthopedic shoes that scream discount apothecary, none of it flatters, and all of it ages. She somehow out-frumped actual polygamists still living in compounds. And while her wardrobe seems to be an attempt at modesty, it does little to conceal what looks suspiciously like bloating and weight gain often associated with untreated fibroids or perimenopause, real conditions that deserve real medical attention, not just oversized shirts and martyr cosplay. Meanwhile, the other wives, freed from the gravitational pull of Cody and Robyn's codependent circus, are practically glowing. Mary and Christine are thriving post-divorce. Janelle has morphed into the Teflon queen, and all three exude a vitality Robyn simply doesn't. The contrast is stark. Liberation brings levity, while Robyn, still entrenched in dysfunction, continues to wither. Robyn Brown isn't just tired, she's tiresome. Her every movement, wardrobe choice, and sigh seems curated to evoke pity while evading responsibility. Whether the root cause is physical, psychological, pharmaceutical, or all of the above, the outcome is the same. A woman who has made helplessness her brand, and who, despite having her face plastered on television screens nationwide, contributes nothing of value. Not to the family, not to the viewers, and certainly not to herself. Cody Brown says his failed relationships aren't his fault, and he actually believes it. In yet another dazzling display of mental gymnastics, Cody Brown, reality TV's most unwilling accountability partner, graced Fox with an interview this morning, only to immediately contort personal failure into communal guilt. When confronted about his fractured relationships with his children, Cody did what Cody does best: blame everyone else, namely the ex-wives who finally had the good sense to escape his emotional quagmire. According to Brown, he only accepted responsibility in a previous moment because he was in a military-type setting, an environment, he insists, where one must assume full culpability even when only partially at fault. This special forces-flavored metaphor would be almost laughable if it weren't so transparently self-serving. In Cody's hands, the military creed, "if one fails, all fail," is mutated into a defense mechanism. If he fails as a father, then the wives must share the blame for not propping up his incompetence or forcing the children to ignore it. How convenient. His children's alienation, you see, is not the result of his selfishness or absence during critical moments, like, say, choosing not to attend Isabel's surgery or skipping visits to his grandchildren, but because the kids were unfairly swayed by the divorcing wives. Not poor parenting, not coldness during COVID, just polygamy, divorce, and those pesky maternal bonds. And let's not forget his dramatic letter, a performance piece masquerading as a deathbed confession in which he laments having no time to repair bonds with his children. A compelling narrative, if it weren't completely false. He has time. What he lacks is action. Or more precisely, the will to take any unless it comes with a camera crew and a paycheck. The interview itself offered a golden opportunity. When directly asked if he'd had an epiphany, all Cody had to do was muster the courage to say yes and salvage a shred of the redemption arc he so desperately wants. But true to form, he declined. Again. Each question lobbed at him like a lifeline, and each one dodged with the grace of a man allergic to growth. Instead, Cody leaned into revisionist history with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. His narrative? Everything was just peachy with the kids until the divorce forced them to choose sides. He paints himself as a tragic victim of circumstance and strategic motherly influence. Never mind that viewers have had front-row seats to his years of disengagement and condescension. He wasn't ousted by manipulation. He was abandoned by children who finally saw the Emperor had no parenting skills. As for his new hobby of twisting teamwork into a justification for personal failure, let's recall that his glaring weakness on special forces was his inability to function as part of a team. But now that he can contort the concept into a shield for his shortcomings, suddenly he's quoting squad-based ideology like he invented it. Then there's the PR problem. Cody's interview presence is so catastrophically self-defeating, one has to wonder if his team is composed of saboteurs. From cringeworthy attempts at humor, 3 failed tries at a hairdo joke no less, to thinly veiled insults, he exudes the charisma of a man trying to charm a mirror and still losing the argument. And yes, the hair is still objectively awful. Let's call this what it is, a masterclass in blame shifting, image management, and self-mythologizing. Cody Brown isn't trying to rebuild a family. He's auditioning for a solo spin-off in the crumbling ruins of his own ego. And if the ratings spike just enough, perhaps we'll all be subjected to a second act no one asked for. Cody Brown, accountability escape artist turned accidental star. The children deserve better. The audience deserves honesty. But all we're getting is the same tired monologue, polished in delusion and dressed in denial. Cody Brown isn't misunderstood. He's a master manipulator with a camera crew. In a stunning twist no one saw coming, except everyone, Cody Brown, patriarch-in-chief of Sister Wives, graced Fox News with yet another performance in self-victimization. Fresh from his stint on Special Forces, where he was allegedly forced to accept responsibility for his fractured relationships with his children, Cody promptly backpedaled. According to him, the show made him shoulder 100% of the blame, but fear not, because the real problem, he insists, is that his ex-wives haven't accepted their equal share of fault. Ah yes, the classic Cody maneuver. Accept responsibility long enough to be applauded, then promptly hand it back like a hot potato. In his revisionist retelling, Cody claims his relationships with all his children were great before the divorces. It's a lovely fantasy, albeit unburdened by reality. This narrative conveniently ignores that he demanded Janelle evict her sons, declared them unwelcome until they groveled before Robyn, and then acted shocked when the family imploded. The idea that the divorce caused the estrangement, rather than the estrangement leading to the divorce, is a masterstroke in denial. Robyn, ever the co-author of this alternate timeline, once mused in a talking head that everything with the kids was peachy until Christine left. "I just don't know what happened," she murmured, as if the audience had not been watching this show for nearly 2 decades with functioning memory. Together, they have refined the art of blame deflection into a synchronized routine. Cody blames Christine. Robyn blames Christine. The kids? Also Christine's fault. Isabel's lonely spinal surgery, Christine's doing. Gabe's forgotten birthday, chalk it up to Janelle. The gaping void where a relationship with Leon once was, surely Mary's burden to bear. And still, they posture as victims. Robyn's influence over Cody is nothing short of puppeteering. Each time he edges toward introspection, she reels him back into the narrative in which he's the misunderstood martyr, drowning in the chaos wrought by those cruel, ungrateful ex-wives. Any potential for genuine growth is promptly redirected into a monologue about how wronged he's been. And here's the real kicker. Everything is on camera. Every tantrum, every manipulation, every lie. Cody seems to forget he's not writing a memoir. This is televised history. The gall to fabricate a narrative while the receipts are quite literally in reruns is audacious, even by reality TV standards. The production team's failure to splice in clips that contradict this nonsense is a crime against editing. In one of his latest gems, Cody accepts blame, but only for not commanding his wives to just sit down and shut up. Ah, yes, the noble patriarch, lamenting that he didn't silence the women in his life more forcefully. It's not accountability. It's the illusion of it, packaged in patriarchal self-pity. At this point, the only honest moment would be if Cody admitted he wanted monogamy with Robyn from the start. It would, at least, be refreshing. The evidence is abundant. The Coyote Pass lot debacle, the infamous COVID rules season. None of it screams committed to plural marriage. Quite the opposite. In the end, the tragedy isn't that the relationships fell apart. It's that the person who detonated them keeps insisting someone else lit the fuse. The real reason sister wives fell apart wasn't polygamy. It was the princess complex. In the latest episode of Family Dysfunction, brought to you by Coyote Pass, we're treated to yet another textbook display of Cody and Robyn's performative martyrdom. The setup is simple enough: a meeting at Coyote Pass to finalize a land sale. Janelle and Mary arrive on time. It's cold. They wait in their cars. Logical, right? Apparently not. At least not in the alternate universe where punctuality is offensive and self-victimization is a full-time job. When Cody and Robyn roll in late, of course, they immediately interpret the others sitting in their cars as a hostile act. A sign, Robyn declares with somber gravity. Indeed, a sign that it's winter and no one wants frostbite while waiting for the king and queen of delay to make their grand entrance. But rather than acknowledging they were, in fact, the last to arrive, Cody and Robyn launch into their now routine narrative of persecution. Robyn, ever the self-appointed empath, delivers a monologue about being excluded, again, ignoring the obvious. She and her husband were the ones who chose to sit in their car instead of stepping out to engage. And let's not pretend this was a strategic wait for Justin, as Cody weakly claims in a separate couch interview. If that were truly the reason, one wonders why neither of them mentioned it in the moment. Instead, Robyn seizes the opportunity for another pity performance, while Cody plays her gallant protector, his favorite role in their tiresome fairy tale. This isn't an isolated moment. It's part of a pattern, a carefully curated distortion of every interaction Robyn has with the other wives and children. In her world, she is perpetually misunderstood, forever under siege, and always in need of saving. Conveniently, Cody is always there, casting everyone else as the villain to keep her pedestal firmly intact. What's most astounding is the composure maintained by the other women, particularly Janelle, Christine, and Mary, who continue to rise above this emotional theater with a dignity that, frankly defies belief. In the face of manipulation, gaslighting, and even the unimaginable grief of personal loss, they have resisted the temptation to explode. Had the roles been reversed, one can only imagine the full-throttle outrage from the Robyn-Cody axis. Then there's the matter of Robyn's impromptu sermons on family unity and polygamous values. The irony would be comedic if it weren't so galling. Robyn, who has never meaningfully lived the lifestyle, who has fostered division at every turn, is somehow the moral authority on how the family should operate? Meanwhile, Christine, raised in polygamy, descended from AUB prophets, the very reason the show gained traction, sits quietly sidelined while production hands Robyn the family values megaphone.
The question isn't why Robyn speaks. It's why anyone listens. Therapy doesn't fix narcissists. Sometimes it makes them worse.
Cody Brown has done the impossible. He's turned therapy into yet another stage for narcissistic theater. During a recent Fox interview, he managed to demonstrate in real time why attempting therapy, intervention, or even the mildest confrontation with a narcissist is nothing more than an exercise in futility. With practiced ease, Cody told the Sister Wives staff exactly what they wanted to hear. He was taking responsibility. It was his fault. He was ready to own it all. How noble. Then, moments later, he pivoted to the Fox anchors and admitted the truth, that it was all an act, a strategic move to survive the moment. Responsibility, you see, is just another costume change. Of course, the anchors, clearly unprepared for the Cody Brown school of historical revisionism, offered no resistance. And why would they? Challenging a narcissist requires preparation, a working memory, and at least one functioning moral compass. Instead, Cody was allowed to rewrite the past unchallenged, once again trampling over his children's pain with the gleeful apathy of someone who's already decided their feelings are an inconvenience. As for the language of therapy, Cody has weaponized it like a true textbook case. Terms like gaslighting and safe are now mere props in his self-serving narrative, drained of their actual meaning and repurposed for emotional manipulation. It's therapy speak without the therapy, empathy without the empathy, a linguistic masquerade for someone incapable of genuine growth. His children, however, are under no illusions. They've seen the reruns, watched the plot lines repeat. They know exactly who he is, right down to his hollow core. And judging by the growing silence from the original batch of Brown offspring, the message is clear. Peace lies in distance. Most have seemingly chosen the path of minimal or no contact, a boundary not born of cruelty, but of self-preservation. At one point, Cody even attempted a feeble gesture at breakthrough, briefly acknowledging his role in the family dysfunction, only to revise that stance moments later. The whiplash was immediate, though unsurprising. While those reflective talking head segments are filmed after the fact, the editors clearly had a sense of humor. Slipping his back pedal in just after his moment of growth wasn't just intentional, it was cinematic. In the end, Cody remains exactly what he's always been. A man too self-involved to evolve, and too performative to realize he's standing in the rain, mouth agape, drowning not from water, but from his own delusions.
They say opposites attract, but this trio looks more like a casting call than a friendship. One can't help but marvel at the curious cast of characters orbiting Janelle these days. Watching her pal around with two women who seem hand-picked for maximum dissonance is like witnessing a social experiment designed by a particularly bored producer. The trio exudes the same kind of chemistry as a networking brunch at a multi-level marketing convention, which, incidentally, may not be far off the mark. Whispers abound that Janelle's social circle reads more like an MLM family tree than a natural friendship group. Though the digital breadcrumbs tracing their business entanglements were conveniently scrubbed, the pattern is difficult to ignore. It's less about camaraderie and more about strategic alignment, with each personality vying to outshine the others, perhaps not for affection, but for screen time. And yet, Janelle's real-life connections continue to confound. One moment she's jetting off to Hawaii to reconnect with a heavy metal musician from the Butcher Babies. The next she's in Nashville with a group that looks like they wandered off the set of a country-themed bachelorette party. There's an undeniable wild streak lurking beneath her otherwise calm, collected exterior, a party persona she seems to reserve for those who won't plaster it across TLC's primetime lineup. Some argue there's nothing suspicious here. People have eclectic friendships. A retired teacher here, a 20-something there, a former coworker thrown in for good measure. It's called having a social life. But this isn't your average PTA bake sale roster. This is Janelle, post-Cody, surrounded by a PR-ready entourage that feels less like organic companionship and more like a curated brand relaunch. In the end, it evokes the same confusion as Danielle from 90 Day Fiancé introducing her ride or die crew. Janelle claims she only met these women a year before relocating, yet suddenly they're front and center, flanking her like reality TV bodyguards. Okay, Janelle, sure.
Robyn didn't blend her kids into the family. She staged a takeover. On yet another rewatch of the early seasons, one thing becomes glaringly obvious. Aurora was always front and center. Without fail, in every scene prior to the family's Flagstaff relocation, there she was, first in line, leaping into arms, squarely in the camera's view. It wasn't subtle. It was consistent, calculated, and unmistakably choreographed. The child had a sixth sense for the lens and a front row seat to every emotional exchange. Fast forward a few seasons, and the transformation is jarring. Now she barely makes eye contact, speaks in hushed tones, and clings to the edges of scenes like a background extra. What happened? Well, for starters, Gwen once casually revealed that she and Aurora had a running game. A low-stakes scheme to appear in as many scenes as possible. Just two kids having fun, making the best of life in a never-ending documentary. It's also a quiet indictment of Robyn's long-standing narrative, that her children were excluded and never truly accepted by the original family. Strange. Kids engaged in mischief together rarely do so from mutual animosity. In fact, the original family appeared to make a genuine, if imperfect, effort to integrate Robyn's children. 16 years of established parenting dynamics don't bend overnight, and the OG kids had their own ways of roughhousing, bonding, and communicating. Robyn, however, interpreted these as acts of rejection, largely because her parenting style differed so wildly that any friction was misdiagnosed as cruelty. Blending families is complex. Robyn expected the OG wives to do the heavy lifting, while she remained curiously hands-off, a passive participant with outsized expectations. Meanwhile, Cody, completely bewitched by his new flame, delegated the responsibility entirely, seemingly indifferent to whether this new branch would graft smoothly onto the old tree. Spoiler alert, it didn't. In the early years, when Robyn was clawing her way up the family hierarchy with a steely grin and soft-spoken righteousness, Aurora was deployed like a PR prop, always present, always affectionate, always performing familiarity with people she barely knew. The goal? To rewrite history. To manufacture the illusion that this group had always been one big, happy, polygamous unit. But once Robyn secured her throne, she began the Great Separation. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. The same family Aurora had once clung to was now recast as cold and unwelcoming. A complete reversal. A reinvention. Call it what it is, emotional manipulation, dressed up as maternal concern. Aurora, cast as the golden child, bears the brunt of Robyn's psychological theater. Far more than Dayton or Brianna, she seems desperate not to disappoint, visibly buckling under the pressure. It reads less like loyalty and more like anxiety. And let's not ignore Robyn's early indoctrination techniques. Aurora and Brianna were coached to fawn over Cody long before the vows were exchanged. Daddy was not a title they chose. It was assigned, enforced, and policed. The ick factor is hard to ignore when affection is dictated before the ink dries on the marriage license. Robyn's entitlement extended beyond titles. Take the infamous buffet line incident. Her children, predictably front and grabbing at plates, were asked to wait while ranch workers served themselves. Cheryl's request was simple etiquette. Robyn's face said otherwise. Outrage, disgust. How dare her children be expected to act like everyone else? Robyn never wanted equality for her kids. She wanted elevation. First in line, first in favor, first in the family photo, from day one. And now, as her golden child retreats into a shell of anxiety and performance fatigue, one can't help but wonder, was it ever about belonging or just about appearances? Cody Brown didn't break down on Special Forces. He auditioned for a comeback. If Cody Brown's appearance on Special Forces taught us anything, it's that the man remains committed to the bit. That bit being self-delusion with a side of vanity. One would think a stint on a grueling, no-frills reality show might spark a hint of introspection. But no. In true Cody fashion, his post-show interview served up more defensive spin than a malfunctioning washing machine. Apparently displeased with how the edit portrayed him, as the sweaty, out-of-breath, responsibility-dodging patriarch he is? Cody took the opportunity to recast himself as misunderstood. His narrative pivots from universally disliked and clearly crumbling to some strange martyrdom arc where he nobly accepts blame for his divorces, except not really. It's less accountability and more damage control, dressed as emotional honesty. Let's talk about the wheezing. While viewers watched him all but collapse under the pressure, he later claimed the physical challenges weren't difficult for him. Of course they weren't. He was just panting dramatically for, sympathy? A cinematic moment? His big interrogation scene, a masterclass in performative vulnerability, reeked of someone parroting what he assumed the instructors wanted to hear. And the moment one of them questioned the authenticity of his tears, chef's kiss. Because nothing exposes a faux redemptive arc faster than someone calling out the crocodile sobs. But the charade doesn't end with the show. Cody seems determined to stage a comeback on yet another season of Sister Wives, naturally, using his children as props in a hastily constructed redemption tour. The blueprint is obvious. Reconnect with the estranged kids, apologize just enough to feign growth, and hope the audience forgets the previous seasons of narcissism and neglect. And while chaos swirled, Cody's main concern? His hair. Because of course it was. Not the optics of emotional collapse or familial breakdown, just that his curls weren't camera-ready. One can only imagine he believes any unfavorable angle was part of some avant-garde strategy to appear relatable. In truth, what Cody needs isn't a redemption arc. It's a reality check. Ideally, in the form of a rerun of the car scene where the women, exhausted and exasperated, had to repeatedly tell him to stay present and follow basic instructions. That moment captured what his Special Forces edit merely reinforced. A man so wildly out of touch, he mistakes delusion for depth and self-interest for sacrifice. Special Forces didn't redeem Cody Brown. It exposed him. It's always entertaining when reality TV personalities wade into the wider media landscape, convinced they've got something to prove, or worse, redeem. Enter Cody Brown, best known for his tenure as polygamy's most bewildering poster child, now strutting his way through Special Forces like he's auditioning for the Navy SEALs and a men's rights convention simultaneously. Physically, sure, he's surprising. This aging man with a hairdo that screams, lost in the early 2000s, somehow managed to outperform actual athletes. A curious feat, considering he spent his fame coasting on a surplus of wives and a deficit of self-awareness. But before the applause can even echo, he opens his mouth and ruins absolutely everything. His obsession with feeling masculine and being a man plays like satire when he's surrounded by women with Olympic-level skill sets. His blustering monologues, constant need to assert dominance, and his grating hall monitor energy reduce his surprising stamina to background noise. He's less of a teammate and more of a try-hard mascot with an ego problem. He doesn't follow instructions, overtalks everyone, and manages to make even a heartfelt video from his wife look like a cringe comedy sketch. Cue the audience eye roll. And speaking of that wife, Robyn. Apparently, her absence from promotional duties for the show was less about scheduling and more about homicidal rage. According to cast member Bree, Barstool's own Brianna Chicken Fry, Robyn didn't show up because she wanted to kill her. Charming. It's always a good sign when your emotional reaction to a reality show boils down to threats of imaginary murder. But let's be honest, Robyn's not mad because of the show. She's mad because Special Forces unmasked the fantasy. Cody was supposed to come off as rugged and heroic. She is the devoted, misunderstood wife. Instead, he looked like an egotistical buffoon, pawing at the women, barking orders like a boot camp drill sergeant who skipped charm school, and never once bothering to learn their names. Just, ladies, do this, and ladies, do that, as if barking vague instructions somehow makes him a leader. What it actually does is reveal the man behind the curtain. Cody wasn't the mastermind. He was the mule. The women carried the mental load, he just trotted along. Every moment he tried to assert himself only confirmed how utterly outclassed he was. And Robyn? Well, aligning yourself with that kind of energy doesn't exactly scream strong female lead. It screams desperately clinging to delusion. The real sting, of course, comes from the realization that their reputations weren't just tarnished by sister wives and the mean old wives trope they've long blamed. No, they did this to themselves, on camera no less. This was their shot to win over a broader audience, to show they were more than cable network curiosities. Instead, they got exposed on a bigger stage, and now the rest of the world is just catching up to what longtime viewers already knew.
If Robyn truly does resent Bree, the reason likely isn't just Special Forces. It's probably the comments Bree made on her podcast. Specifically, the unfiltered assessments of Cody's behavior and, allegedly, his cognitive capacity. Add to that some subtle on-camera flirtation and Cody's inexplicable fondness for hands-on leadership with Bree, and you've got all the ingredients for a quietly brewing rivalry wrapped in a very public humiliation. So yes, the show was entertaining, but not for the reasons Cody and Robyn intended. It wasn't a redemption arc. It was a reality check with a side of public relations disaster. And now that the wider audience has seen the unfiltered mess, there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. They wanted a rebrand. What they got was confirmation. You think the problem was polygamy? Janelle says it was just Cody. Let's dig into that delusion, because someone has to. Janelle Brown. The enigma wrapped in modest cardigans and wrapped even tighter in the contradictions of her spiritual affiliations. The question isn't whether she still believes. It's how loudly she has to whisper it before anyone catches on. Despite growing up mainstream LDS, a church that famously and officially washed its hands of polygamy over a century ago, Janelle continues to profess faith in the principle, the doctrinal euphemism for plural marriage. A curious stance, considering the institution that raised her would now prefer to pretend polygamy was just a passing phase, like teenage eyeliner or disco. Yet she clings to it. It works, I've seen it work. The problem was Cody, she insists, as though the man's catastrophic mismanagement of 4 marriages was just an unfortunate hiring error in an otherwise sound business model. In that one sentence, she effectively endorses polygamy while auditioning for sainthood for putting up with its most flamboyantly incompetent spokesperson. Meanwhile, Mary, eternally perched on the emotional windowsill of the family compound, has yet to denounce any of it, possibly out of loyalty to the AUB community she still has ties to. She's dropped hints about cherished family connections and great auntie status,
all while vaguely gesturing towards self-reflection and therapeutic enlightenment. One suspects there's a therapist somewhere desperately trying to undo decades of doctrinal tangling with a very small pair of scissors. Then there's the performative tolerance. Janelle insists it's unfair to judge a whole group by a few, as though the cult-like tendencies, systemic misogyny, and spiritual coercion were merely an overzealous minority. And in the same breath, she pivots to condemning monogamous couples, because if your house is on fire, why not point out your neighbor's leaky faucet? She's also taken up life coaching, which in her case seems less like guidance and more like a prolonged rationalization tour. Pair that with her voting record, and even the most charitable observers begin to lose patience, and frankly, respect. But make no mistake, Janelle still believes. Not necessarily in organized religion, heaven forbid anything structured, but in the comforting narrative of divine order and eternal reward. She finds solace in faith, even if she's now content to practice it from a recliner in Maddie and Caleb's Christ-centered living room rather than a pew. Is it a secret? Hardly. Janelle telegraphs her beliefs with the subtlety of a flashing neon sign in a blackout. She may not be in any church's pew roster, but there's little doubt she still sees herself as a card-carrying believer. Official excommunication? Unlikely. In LDS culture, you can slip out the side door without fanfare. Inactivity isn't scandalous, it's practically a rite of passage. And like many devout LDS women, she likely remains sealed to Cody in that eternal celestial spreadsheet, despite the flaming wreckage of their earthly union. Why? Because in this theology, eternal happiness means returning to the man who couldn't organize a picnic, let alone a family. So no, Janelle isn't hiding. She's simply living her faith on her terms, quiet, unshaken, and thoroughly convinced that the problem wasn't the ideology, but the man she hitched it to. Heaven help her. Subscribe for more.